Okay, what I'd like to do in this video is talk about applying some lighting. Lighting is what really makes your 3D scene look good and get it away from looking just kind of like a plastic computer generated scene. So if I render this right now, you'll notice I still have my goofy little shape here, and I put in a background plane that just has a checkerboard pattern on it. If I render this, we'll see that it's actually very flat looking. There's no shadow. I mean, there's shadow inside the object, but there's not really much interaction between the object and the ground it's sitting on. It doesn't look like it's sitting there in space. So let's take a look at maybe adjusting this a bit. First of all, I want to point out that I'm got the rendering pop-up here, and in the tabs I've selected the rendering tab because there's some nice easy to find things just right from here. I'm going to go under the lighting pop down for this panel, and I'm going to just choose use all lights rather than use default lighting. And when I do that, everything turns dark. Notice that when I render, it still renders with the default light. It still looks the same, but now I get more of a atmospheric thing happening in terms of fiddling with the lights, and this is going to be helpful for me as I progress. So first thing I'm going to put in, let's try putting in a spotlight. So I'm going to just click on this guy, and you see there's a little bit of a spot and some glow down here. I'm going to get out the move tool, and as I move this guy up, you can see the light is passing across the object. Let me bring it out a bit. There we go, and you can see the object's now getting lit in kind of a standard way. Let's pull it back a little bit more and maybe do a rotation on it. And the nice thing about turning on that lighting again is that we get a sense for how it's going to work in the scene. So I've turned that on now, and if I do a quick render, and again I'm using mental ray here, you'll notice that now I'm getting lighting just from the light that I've brought in. It's no longer using the default light, it's just using the light I've brought in. So once you introduce lights in, Maya is kindly turning off the main default light and saying, oh, you know, you want to do this on your own. So now notice it still looks awfully strange. There's light casting in here, but there's no shadow behind. We get a really hard edge here where the spotlight is, and get the hard edge across the top too. So let's make some adjustments just to that stuff right away. So over in the side here for the properties of the light, there's some things that we can adjust. First of all, cone angle. If right now the default is 40, if I increase this, notice that more of the shape gets lit. Penumbra angle, that's the softness around the edge of the light. Right now there's no penumbra at all. So if I go ahead and crank this up a bit, let's make this a little softer. Notice that the preview here changes. Let's go ahead and do a quick render and see what happens. Cool. Now we're getting kind of a softer angle here. By opening up the angle on the spotlight, it works a little bit. Notice there's still no drop shadow happening, and you know it's still awfully dark in here too. Well, first of all, let's get a drop shadow in here. If I come back into lighting, notice that there's a little shadows area. And again, if you're not seeing this on the side, it's just this third button in. Just pop that open, and I'm going to go under shadows, and I'm going to leave depth map shadows alone. I'm going to come down. Instead of doing depth map, let's do ray trace shadows. And we'll just do a quick render to see what that looks like. So with ray trace shadows, now notice there's a drop shadow casting back behind this shape. But it's a very hard edge shadow. It doesn't look very good. You can goof around with that by adding some shadow rays here. and also by increasing the light radius. So imagine a tight light radius, it's right on it. Further away, or a wider light radius, is kind of like the further you put a light away from an object. If you look at the shadow will be softer the further that gets away. So if I test this out now, it'll take a little bit longer to render. Notice that the shadow now gets softer, and it works okay. Still, though, we have kind of this flashlight effect that's happening inside of this, and that's because we have one spotlight. It really is just literally a flashlight. So let's add some other lights in here too. So one thing I'm going to just experiment with, and that's really what I just encourage you to do, is experiment. I'm going to add an area light. Drop this in, and let's move it. You can see when I bring that area light up, it gets quite big. Let's go to our 4-up view so we can kind of see this. And I'm going to move this area light, and let's rotate it. And you can see from some of these adjustments, let's zoom out here. Here's my area light, and you can see there's this little line coming out from it that indicates where the light is pointing. I'm going to just drag that down a little bit, and let's move it up too. So I'm going to get the move tool. Again, zoom out further, and just play with this until I've got something where I think it's going to work a little better. Alright, now I'm going to come in here. One thing you'll notice about this is that it looks fairly blown out, and I've also readjusted the scene. Let's go back to kind of where it was before. If I render this, now I see more of the grid behind. It doesn't look so much like being a spotlight. One thing I think I should do, though, is the area light and the spotlight are kind of coming from the same direction. I think I'm going to have the area light come from another direction. So again, if we look at this view here, here's my top view, and you can kind of see here's the spotlight. So our camera, if our camera were anywhere, it'd be kind of right about here. So our spotlight's here and our area light's here. Maybe we should move the area light so it's a little more on the opposite side. Let's rotate this around. I think that's about right. Let's come out and look at this. Okay. Now, the other thing I'm going to do with the area light, let's turn on shadows for it too. And turn on ray trace. I'm going to go ahead and give this a couple of different shadow rays, and that's just going to just soften the shadow as it's diffusing away from the object. Let's take a look at this with the render. Alright, so we see that light coming in. Here's that shadow coming across. It's hard to see the shadow right here just because we have the spotlight coming in too. But I'm going to go ahead and lower the intensity on that shadow. I'm sorry, of the area light. Let's take that down just a little bit, and I'm going to change its color. I want to make it just a little bit more blue. And let's see what our effect is. There we go. Now, Still, it's looking kind of foggy in here, so let's see if we can adjust this a bit more. All right, let's try another. Oh, and I had the wrong view selected, sorry. Let's come back. It's the perspective view is selected here. There you go. And you can kind of see the influence of this. So we can fiddle with this more to get the shading all right. I'm gonna pull back my spotlight a bit more. Get our area light maybe just a little closer. Oops. Sorry. All right, let's take a look. Oh, and again, I did it from the wrong view. That was actually interesting because you could see where the shadows were hitting. Yeah, here's our spotlight coming across. Here's our area light, and you can see kind of the bluish shadow coming from the area light here. Again, our camera is right about here when it's looking at this stuff. Let's come back. Maybe we could move our camera around as well. Alright, so now we have some drop shadows in here. We've got this lit from a couple of different views. And that's the effect that lighting gives you. It looks like we have some crinkly aluminum foil applied to this object. If we wanted to put a bump map on the surface of the floor, I suppose we could too. Let's fiddle around with that for a second. I'm going to bring up this. Here's that surface, and maybe we apply a little bit of a bump map here. Noise on here, and we're going to crank this down a little bit so it's not happening too severely. And let's see what happens. Okay, yeah, so now we have a kind of a funky surface pattern happening on the floor of it too. So you can see, you know, by fiddling around with just the lights a little bit, turning on shadows, and then also goofing around with the amount of ray shadows that you have. I turned on ray tracing on both of those. You can see the effect, and it makes for a much more interesting image than what we originally had when we had no lighting applied other than the default light and obviously no shadows. So play around with it. By no means is this comprehensive. This is just to kind of get you started with lighting. When you're working with lighting, you might experiment with like a 3-light rig where you have a key light that's coming in from maybe over a shoulder. Like over your left shoulder. If we're looking at this dead on, maybe the light would come in from over the shoulder, kind of like the spotlight's doing here. Then you might have a fill light coming in, and it's going to have a lower intensity, maybe another spotlight coming in from the side. and that's going to typically have a cool color associated with it, and its intention is to kind of fill in the thick shadow areas that occur. And then sometimes you throw in a backlight too, and the backlight will make the back area of the image pop off too. In fact, we could try that real quick. Let's see, I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but let's try that. I'm going to add one more spotlight. Let's just bring it around. Lift it up, here it is. And let's open up that cone angle on it. I'm gonna let it angle down just a little bit. Let's open up the penumbra, and we'll just try using ray trace with an open radius and quite a number of shadows. Let's see what happens, and I should change its intensity level too. Let's bring this down and just take a picture. Oh, wrong view again. Not a huge difference here. What I'd probably fiddle with is try to get that top back part of this shape to open up a little, so that we got just a faint little halo coming around the backside. It has a good tendency with the 3-light rig, the backlight, its intention is to break out the object from its background. So you'd fiddle around with this a little bit more, trying to get that to happen. But you know, play around with it, play with the colors, play with different kinds of lights. I've basically just used area lights and spotlights. What happens if you use point lights, distant lights? Try all that stuff out and see what happens. Okay, thank you.